get started. I think Valerie's going to put up our, we have a recording of the lecture, and then we'll get to chat with Alan afterwards. So away we go.
Yeah, please holler if you cannot hear or see this.
Hello everyone, my name is Alan Elliott. I'm the Biodiversity Conservation Network Manager at Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh, and it's my pleasure today to talk to you about the Global Conservation Consortium for Rhododendron. So the format of the talk is that I'll give a little overview of the genus. I'll not say too much because we all know what a rhododendron is. I'll then go on to talk about RBG, our history and connections with the genus. I will give a wee overview of the BGCI's Global Conservation Consortia before going on to talk about the progress made with the Global Conservation Consortium for Rhododendron. I'll then talk about some recent and ongoing conservation work within the genus. And finally, I'll finish up talking about the future and hopefully the collaboration that will come from the Rhododendron Research Network. This map illustrates the distribution of rhododendron across the Northern Hemisphere down through China, Japan, Southeast Asia, all the way to Northern Australia. It was generated using GBIF data from herbarium specimens that had latitudes and longitudes data available. I quite like it. It shows that the genus doesn't have a complete blanket distribution across the Northern Hemisphere. It's disjunct in places. It's also good in highlighting areas where there are gaps in our knowledge and data. So for instance, North Korea, there are very few herbarium records from there, or at least very few georeferenced ones. And then again, Southeast Asia, for being home to a third of the genus, there are very few georeferenced and available herbarium records. The genus is very active. In the past 10 years, there have been about 100 new taxa described, mostly from Southeast Asia, China and Japan. The genus now includes groups like Ledum, Menziessia, Diplarchi that were all formerly taxonomically distinct, but through DNA work, they've been fairly conclusively shown to be best treated as rhododendron. And from my point of view, importantly, around 25% of the genus are threatened and in need of some form of conservation action. We have been, over the past year, working towards the consolidated rhododendron checklist as part of the work for the GCCR. Currently, we recognise 1,085 species of rhododendron and a further 313 infraspecific taxa. This work is important to the consortium in that it forms the baseline for red list assessments. It also feeds into the World Flora Online project. We are, at Edinburgh, we are coordinating the curation of the Ericaceae, and the data, taxonomic data for that is being held within a database at Edinburgh. We're trying to be as inclusive as possible, so I would be delighted to hear from anybody who has any strong taxonomic opinions to make our data as robust and as inclusive as we possibly can. This image illustrates some of the floral diversity that you find within the genus Rhododendron. It was created using the Living Collection at Edinburgh by a colleague of mine, David Purvis. It just goes some way to illustrate the fact that rhododendron are widely celebrated and used in horticulture for their amenity value. There are somewhere in the region of about 20,000 registered cultivars on top of the botanical and natural diversity you find within the genus. And as such, you find rhododendron festivals in countries where they grow naturally, in China, Japan, but also in the US, and our Scottish annual rhododendron festival is just about to start at the beginning of April. Despite rhododendron being a ubiquitous part of the garden and design landscape within Scotland, we do unfortunately suffer from Rhododendron ponticum acting as an invasive non-native. on the west coast especially, and the costs associated with the removal of ponticum to minimise the threat to our native woodlands is running into the millions, and as a result the whole genus at times suffers from bad press here in the UK. So we have to contend with headlines like this one from the Daily Mail, why I would like to see every rhododendron wiped off the face of the planet, to much more nuanced pieces that talk about the dangers that rhododendron ponticum face to our native flora and woodlands. And occasionally you get an article that is the flip of those, and it suggests that we should be embracing these within the wider natural landscape because of the threats to biodiversity much more widely. And of course, there is the twist in the tail to our invasive species. Genetic research done at Edinburgh University has shown that the populations that are acting invasively on the west coast of Scotland are all from the Iberian Peninsula, where the particular subspecies ponticum that occurs there is highly threatened due to climate change. So it could be argued that what we have is actually a very large ex situ conservation collection on the west coast. So as an institution, RBGE has been around for 350 years. The Botanic Garden was founded in 1670, making us the second oldest in Britain. We owe our formation to two Edinburgh doctors, Andrew Balfour and Robert Sibbald, to set up a physic garden to cultivate medicinal herbs for medical use in response to how bad the medical provision in Scotland was at the time, which was highlighted in the 1650s when the plague tore through Edinburgh. So our first garden was fairly modest. It was at the bottom of the Royal Mile, close to where Holyrood Palace and the Scottish Parliament are now. We soon outgrew the garden, and in 1675 we moved to a second site on the banks of Norloch at Trinity Hospital, which is now where Waverley train station is. And if you've ever arrived into the city on a train, there's a good chance that you'll have walked past the plaque that commemorates the fact that we once had a garden here. Then in 1763, we moved to a greenfield site outside what was then the city, on the road between Edinburgh and Leith. This was in response to the pollution of the old town. It became increasingly difficult to grow plants, and we also needed much more space. The garden at the time was fairly unusual in that the layout was informal, winding paths, water features. There was also the glasshouse complex in the middle of the garden up against the boundary wall, which was unusual for the time as well. Although you can see here just behind the house that there was a large area for growing medicinal herbs, keeping true to our physic garden roots. And then finally, in 1820, we moved to our current site in the north of the city at Inverleith, where we have our historic palm house and 1960s main range glass houses. And the splash of colour you can see in the background there is our azalea lawn. It's not just our site at Edinburgh, we also have three regional gardens, Benmore, which is over in Argyll, we have Logan, which is in southwest Scotland, and we have Doik, which is in the Scottish borders. And each of the three regional gardens have a very different climatic condition compared to Edinburgh. Benmore is very wet, Logan is very mild, and Doik is as close as you can get to a continental climate in Scotland. And between the four gardens and our glasshouse complex, it gives us a very good range of environmental conditions to grow rhododendrons and many other plants. And looking forward, our site at Edinburgh is about to undergo a major infrastructure project known as the Edinburgh Biomes, where we are completely refurbishing and rebuilding our research glasshouse complex, and the main range and historic palm houses will also be brought to a much more environmentally friendly standard, and we'll have a purpose-built education centre as well. So our connection to our earliest records of growing rhododendron date back to 1775. We have lists of what was growing in our garden at Leith Walk at the time from the then Professor of Botany, John Hope. And in the lists, there are Rhododendron ferruginum from Europe and Rhododendron maximum viscosum from North America being cultivated. Then during the 19th century, due to our connection teaching botany to medical students at Edinburgh University, many Scottish botanical surgeons would continue to send their connection with the garden once they took up jobs around the world by sending back seeds to Edinburgh. In the early 20th century, during what was known as the golden era of plant collecting, the partnership between the then Regius keeper Isaac Bailey Balfour and the plant collector George Forrest saw masses of plant material flooding back from southwest China into the collection at Edinburgh and much more widely into horticulture. George employed a team of Nashi collectors from southwest China, and because of them, his collections were incredibly successful. In terms of rhododendrons, they introduced or sent back some 500 taxa of rhododendron from southwest China as herbarium collections, and introduced over 300 species of rhododendron into cultivation. Because of the wealth of rhododendron material in our living collection and also in our herbarium, we became a centre of taxonomy and monography for the genus, and we published accounts by members of staff and other researchers who were working on the group using our collections from 1978 right through until 2015. In terms of conservation horticulture, in 1994 we were involved in some pioneering work repatriating wild-sourced Chinese rhododendrons back to country of origin. In 2002, in partnership with the Kunming Institute of Botany, we established the Lijiang Field Station on the Yulong. One of the stated aims of the field station was to participate in rhododendron conservation on the Yulong. Then in 2011, RBGE worked with BGCI to produce the first comprehensive and genus-wide conservation assessment for the whole genus. Our connection to rhododendron continues with our work in countries like Nepal and Vietnam, continued work in China and Southeast Asia. Our current living collections across the 4 gardens comprise of 4,000 unique accessions, which translates to roughly 7,300 plants. Within our collection, we have 861 botanical taxa that are represented, some 525 species. We also grow 334 cultivars as well, just for horticultural interest. And within our collections, more than 54% of all threatened taxa have a home in the collections at Edinburgh. And our collection is quite unique in places. So our Vireas, there are not many Virea collections comparable to the one at Edinburgh, where we have 8 species that are probably unique in cultivation in our research glasshouses. Like this species Rhododendron Mogianum, which flowered for the first time for us, probably anywhere in cultivation, in October 2019. Our living collection is also used for other purposes. A colleague at Edinburgh, David Purvis, has spent several years documenting the rhododendron collection using digital macro photography, creating these half-flutter, incredibly diagnostic and beautiful images of rhododendrons growing in our collection. And the book's just about to be published as of the 1st of April. For a number of years now, we have been engaged in doing tissue culture on our heritage lineages and plants of rhododendron that are in poor condition. This has allowed us to build up a small-ish stock of rhododendron as explants. This means that we can periodically grow them on and distribute them to other conservation organisations like the Rhododendron Species Conservation Group here in Scotland. We are in the process of moving away from our heritage lineages to accessions that are of conservation concern, to build up a stock of conservation material that we can hopefully distribute to other botanic gardens in a safe and biosecure way, minimising the risk of Phytophthora being spread between gardens. We've also begun adding red conservation labels to our threatened rhododendron species. It's a relatively cheap and easy way to interpret the collection and give an indication that of the relative rarity of some of the species and the threats that they face. As I said, I'd give an overview of the Global Conservation Consortia, which is a BGCI initiative. It is primarily to scale up conservation activities around tree species, and it's grown out of the global tree assessment. The idea is that the consortia will utilise specialist knowledge to conserve species where the need is greatest and undertake in situ and ex situ work focused within the centres of diversity for the groups that these consortia cover, and ideally would be led also by institutes within those centres of diversity. So to sum it up, it's to mobilise a coordinated network of institutions and experts to collaboratively develop and implement comprehensive conservation strategies for the priority threatened plant groups. There are 6 conservation consortia currently: Acer, Cycad, Dipterocarp, Magnolia, Oaks and Rhododendron, with a few others in the works, including Erica. There is, of course, overlap between the gardens and consortia because the botanic gardens tend not to specialise in just a single group, and as a result, there's overlap between just about all the consortia in terms of who's growing what. So each of the consortia have a number of objectives that they're all working towards. So for my part as coordinator of the GCCR, I have been contacting people, botanic gardens, to see if they would be willing and interested to join the network of experts. We are in the process of identifying which species are in greatest need of conservation concern, and at the moment our baseline for that is the 2011 Red List. As I said earlier, because rhododendrons are fairly well represented within botanic garden collections and horticulture more generally, we're not starting from scratch when it comes to ex situ collections, although not all of those are of the same conservation value. This is where I think the Rhododendron Research Network comes in. Part of the consortia remit is to undertake and facilitate applied research. And quite often with rhododendron, it seems to be that there are many researchers doing work that is applicable to or could be supported by the Global Conservation Consortium for Rhododendron. We're also looking to do as much in situ conservation work as we can. And because of where rhododendrons grow, we are working with our partners in country to build their capacity to better be able to conserve their own diversity. And then more widely, we're looking to raise public awareness and engagement, not just with the conservation threats of rhododendron, but much more widely in the biodiversity crisis and climate emergency that we all face. And of course, all important, helping to raise funding so we can scale up the conservation work. So in each consortium, you have 4 tiers of membership. You have the global lead, which in the case of rhododendron, that's RBGE. We work at a global coordinating level, working with the regional partners who make up the steering committee. Their job is to support and coordinate efforts within their area of influence. And then below that, you have species stewards. They are considered to be the boots on the ground. They are the botanic gardens, collections that are maintaining the threatened species. And then finally, you have affiliates, and these can be individuals not affiliated to any particular organisation who have an interest or expertise in the group, whose help in terms of taxonomy research or expertise on growing or even public outreach would be beneficial for the consortium. So BGCI provide the guidance for the consortia. They coordinate our communications between us, and they help align our goals. They're the ones charged with development of new consortia, and they also provide admin and fundraising support for our work. They also importantly provide the database facilities for the plant search and the pedigree module. That'll be essential for keeping track of who's growing the threatened plants and where. So rhododendron definitely are exceptional species. They aren't or can't readily be seed banked. Some species of conservation concern, presumably through changing climate, are no longer flowering particularly well, therefore not readily producing seed that can be seed banked. While most rhododendron have orthodox seeds that can be or could be seed banked, there are some that definitely exhibit recalcitrant behaviour and therefore don't survive the desiccation process. And then in terms of Virea rhododendrons, the seeds are incredibly short-lived, and therefore there might not be much in the way of value of seed banking them. So the best way we feel to manage ex situ collections is to grow living plants. And because of that, there are a number of challenges that we have to face. So in order to have genetically diverse conservation collections of conservation value, we need a large amount of space. Rhodies tend to be long-lived. We have examples, at least one example of a rhododendron in Edinburgh that was that grew from 1820 until the 1960s, so well over 100 years in cultivation. They do tend to be slow to reproduce if the conditions in cultivation are not quite right. And they're definitely vulnerable to climate change, both in the wild and in cultivation. At Edinburgh, we have been finding it increasingly difficult to cultivate certain species of rhododendron in our garden at Edinburgh because of our hotter, drier summers. So we are looking to outsource the growing of some of those species to our regional gardens that might now have a climatic condition that's more suitable. And of course, with rhododendrons, there is the added complication of plant health and biosecurity, with it being a known vector for Phytophthora sudden oak death. And this is going to be a real challenge for securely moving material across borders. Currently, we have 22 botanical organisations in 15 countries participating in the Global Conservation Consortium for Rhododendron. These include botanic gardens across Europe, North America, New Zealand and Australia. We also have, and importantly, have botanical institutes and the centres of diversity signed up in China, India, Nepal, Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. There are a number of recent and ongoing conservation projects under the umbrella of BGCI's Global Tree Campaign, which have been funded by the Frank Linnea Foundation and the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund, and I'll go through each of these. First project I'm going to talk about was run under the Global Tree Campaign. It was targeting the critically endangered rhododendron liguense from Donghua Karst Mountains in southwest China. It was threatened from deforestation and did not appear to be regenerating naturally, so this was threatening its survival. At the start of the project, it was only known from 15 mature individuals. By the end of the project, due to survey work, they had found 2 additional populations of the species, and as a result, the number of known mature individuals now stands at 55. They were able to collect seed from all 3 of the populations and raise 300 seedlings. And most importantly of all, they had community buy-in. They were able to train 40 villagers, staff from the local forestry department and a commercial plant nursery on how to cultivate, propagate this particular species. And importantly, they found that women from the local village were particularly interested in growing the species in their gardens in the future, which is a great way to do citizen conservation work. A project that's currently ongoing is conserving critically endangered high altitude species in Malaysia. This project is led by Sabah Parks and Sabah Forestry and is targeting Rhododendron moncaboense and Rhododendron tunense, which are both point endemics from 2 different mountains on Sabah. While most of the world was in lockdown, the team on Sabah were able to do some field work. They went to Mount Monkabo last year, but were only able to spend 2 days on the mountain. Because the limiting factor was the lack of fresh water. They had to take 100 litres with them, which gave everybody just 3.5 litres per day. They were able to carry out a 150-metre transect along the ridge and recorded 19 new individuals, which brings the total of mature plants up to 76. They're going back later this year, hopefully to collect seed from the species to help establish an ex situ conservation collection on the island. On Mount Kinabalu, Rhododendron tunense, survey work was carried out by the Ecology and Botany units of Kinabalu Park and students from the University of Malaysia in July and September last year. They were able to do survey work and found 5 populations now, which are 2 new, which brings the grand total of known plants in the wild to 6. They're having difficulty because of the altitudinal difference between the nursery at the base of the mountain and where the species grows on Mount Kinabalu. So they're planning to construct a small nursery near the helipad, hoping that the plants will be able to grow there more readily because the conditions will be closer to what they have further up the mountain. On Papua New Guinea, the Lay Botanic Garden have been working on a project funded by the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Foundation, surveying data deficient species from the 2011 Rhododendron Red List. The suspicion is that all these species are highly threatened because of the point endemic nature of all of them, and the practice of vegetation clearance on ridges for small-scale gardening and agriculture, which is what led to the extinction of Rhododendron retrosipilium. As part of the survey work, they did go back to Markham Point, where the extinct species was last recorded in the 1980s, and sent this picture back that demonstrates the vegetation clearance that you find in all these ridges near human habitation. Also in China, our colleagues at the Kunming Institute of Botany rediscovered Rhododendron adenosum that was declared extinct in the wild as part of their National Red List assessment, published in 2017. They found a single mature flowering specimen of the type locale in 2020, and last year we sent them leaf material from our 1930 accession of Joseph Rock's original collection of the species for comparative genetic analysis, hopefully to help them confirm the identification of what they found. The Botanical Survey of India have been focused on the conservation of Rhododendron maccabianum and Rhododendron wattii from the northeast of the country. They have worked out tissue culture protocols for raising material from seed for both of these species and are now in a position to supplement the wild populations with material grown on from those collections. We're working with them to write species recovery plans to formalise the work that they've done up until this point. So the last conservation story I'd like to highlight is Rhododendron Kanahiri. It's probably the best known example of a threatened rhododendron in cultivation. In 1984, the only known population was destroyed during the construction of a reservoir in the northeast of the island. During the 1990s, the Taiwanese Endangered Species Research Institute were able to distribute seeds of the species of plants that were growing in botanic gardens on Taiwan to gardens in the US, UK, and Japan to establish an ex situ conservation network for the species. What's less well known is they also undertook a 10-year restoration project, and were able to reinstate the species to the banks of the reservoir close to where it originally grew. This was so successful that in 2002, the species was removed from Taiwan's protected plants list. The major piece of work the Global Conservation Consortium for Rhododendron aiming to achieve in the following year is to revisit the red list of rhododendrons, which is now more than 10 years old. In 2021, the global tree assessment should have completed about 20% of the genus. These are predominantly tree species, and that still leaves about 880 that need to be revisited. We plan on batch processing the least concern and data deficient taxa from the 2011 red list, simply to get those up and onto the portal. We then will revisit and redo the near threatened, vulnerables, endangered and critically endangered assessments, as well as attempting to assess any non-evaluated and the 98 new taxa that have been published since 2011. It's highly ambitious, but it means that we'll be doing about 450 assessments in the coming year. We're all here because we have a shared interest in the genus rhododendron. It could be that some of us are engaged in scientific research on the group, conservation work, cultivation in a botanic garden setting, or we simply have an appreciation for the value it brings to our own gardens. The current pandemic, while making aspects of life just that little bit more challenging, has made us much more open to participating in events like these, virtual ones. And to an extent, they're far more inclusive in who can attend and participate than traditional physical-based conferences, which can only be a good thing when we're aiming to build partnerships globally. While there is a real and pressing need for conservation action on the genus rhododendron, I am very much looking forward to what the future brings in terms of collaborative research and working together. And that concludes my talk, so thank you very much for listening.
Excellent, thank you, Alan. It was a fabulous talk. Yes, virtual applause from everyone. Thank you. So, of course, a train is going by right as I have to talk. So if you're hearing that, that's what's going on. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Who wants to ask Alan a question? Jean's unmuted. Did you unmute to ask a question?
No, I just happened to be unmuted. Sorry, but that was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much for sharing. I really enjoyed learning a lot about that. I had no idea that almost 29% of the genus was threatened. So thank you so much for sharing that information. It's a really interesting, interesting problem, and what a great program you guys have. So thank you for sharing it. Is there anything that we as a community can do to help contribute to that program?
Money, money, money.
Money.
Well, money and knowledge. So anybody that's doing field work, looking at populations, that kind of information is going to be invaluable, especially for the red listing. So it's just a case of sharing whatever data you've got, really. And places like this, the Rhodi Research Network Forum, seems to be as good a place as any to do it.
Do you have a portal at RBG, like an online portal for submitting information, or?
So for the consortia, I think that's going to come through BGCI. So all these the different consortia are running, effectively managed through BGCI. So anything that would be of use to the consortium or the consortia as a whole, they would have a centralized portal for all of them. So if you had information on oaks, presumably you would submit it into the BGCI and it would filter around down to the correct consortium. But in saying that, I don't actually know if they have something like that. I know they have centralized databases, so the plant search that they maintain, that's basically records from any botanic garden for anything that they hold that they've submitted. So they are developing various tools that are more consortia specific as well. At the moment, I don't think there's anything like that.
Hartvig, did you have a comment? I see you unmuted.
Hmm?
Dr. Shepker, do you have a comment? I see you
Oh.
unmuted.
Okay, I was just playing around and trying to figure out which button I have to push. But if I have the chance to ask a question, yes. Alan, who is funding the whole project? Was it the Franklin Foundation or someone else?
So there's no overall funder. So Franklinia are funding several, two of the three ongoing on-the-ground conservation projects, and but it's, in terms of funding for the Rhodie Consortium, the only money is what RBG have put in for my salary. So
All right, okay.
it's not a pot of money for the project.
Yeah, but then thanks for at the RBGE for doing this work. It's quite an important one. I have another question concerning this one species, Libuensi, where you had this project going on. Did the Chinese actually check the species by DNA, or were they just morphologically putting that one apart from Huano, which is very closely related to that one? I'm just wondering if this is just the regional form of a larger species. Then, of course, you ask yourself, why should I put lots of energy and money into something which is just a variation?
So that project was wound up before I took the role. So I don't know if they did check the identifications using DNA. I would have hoped that they did.
Well, otherwise we have Dirk Albach from Oldenburg who can do this job.
Yeah, and I suppose it comes down to what it all comes back to taxonomy. So if the Chinese recognize it as a distinct species and they want to do conservation work on it, then they have a right to do that effectively.
Oh, definitely. I mean, whenever the Chinese find out that something is special, they put lots of energy into it. And even if they can create a national park around Libuense, please do that. It's much better than destroying the landscape, definitely.
Yeah, totally.
So that leads into something that I was really interested to think about is how can this network start hooking people up?
Yeah.
You know, where can we fill in those gaps and basically develop pipelines where if somebody needs to say, hey, let's check this species, who do we call? We want to be able to connect people. So I was really interested in how we connect, Alan, because one thing that's interesting for me is when I go online and say, look at BGCI, a lot of it's very opaque to me and I can do a lot of Googling, but it takes intersecting with you to really start understanding what the meat is going on. So how can we build these better, how can we use the network to build better lines of communication?
I suppose this is the first step, really. So I'm fairly new to the Rhodie world. I don't have an extensive personal network like some folk. I mean, Mike and Connor and Hartvig are all known entities to me because they've all shown interest in being part of the consortium. Maria, I overlapped with briefly when she was a student, or we were both students at Edinburgh, and we've discussed Rhodies since then. But I mean, yeah, Connor, of course, as well. Yeah, he's becoming the de facto regional person for the US rhododendrons. But I mean, everybody else here, this is my first meeting, so it's, I guess, more things like this really, just to meet people and start discussing things.
Excellent. Yeah, Maria.
Well, I wonder, so thank you so much for the talk, Alan. And I was really happy to see that people are interested in supporting the conservation effort by growing the species in their garden. And now maybe this is, I was just wondering how much is going on in terms of trying to ask people whether they would be interested to host, you know, important or threatened material in their private gardens, or is this not something desirable?
Well, it depends where in the world you are. So if you're in Europe or North America, I think there's probably a readily available amount of space in people's gardens that they would quite happily grow a threatened rhododendron. In the diversity centres, it's something really quite different. I think they don't have the same. They often don't have the same gardening impetus that we do here. So it was quite heartening to see that in China that locals were keen to grow, or said that they would be keen to grow those plants. So I think it's definitely something that, in terms of near in situ or near ex situ, I can't remember what the term is. So growing stuff in country of origin rather than exporting the material to the UK or US to conserve it. If we can build up citizen conservation work, I think that's a good thing. And with that, obviously, there's definitely going to be a capacity building element there to show people how to grow, especially if they don't have any confidence to do that.
That leads to a question that I had about, so one of the things that ARS has is this community of people who are growing plants very professionally and enthusiastically. So I can't tell you the number of labeled rhododendron collections I have been to as part of an ARS meeting. So what about an effort to just look and see who might have these plants already in their gardens? That seems like something that we could lead pretty effectively.
Yeah, I think so. I have an undergraduate student here at Edinburgh who's doing something similar to that with UK collections. So yeah, I think if in the US, that's definitely something that's very worthwhile, especially if people are growing plants of known wild origin as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of the ARS members actually have, I think Christian being one, very, very good records. And I would rank a lot of our members as having what I would call research quality collections, just in terms of the knowledge. So maybe Christian can talk a little bit about his collection and how he's documented it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I have a quite large species collection. Most of rhododendrons I have grown from seed. I have also myself been exploring in Korea, Japan, and Sikkim, and China, and collected seed, but only as a person, not from any institute. And I think I have the largest collections of Thaliensia subsection rhododendrons in Finland. I grow almost every Thaliensia. And of course, in Finland, growing in Finland, the climate is not the best possible. In Scotland, you have a much better one. I visited your garden, or this arboretum, a couple of years ago, and it's amazing.
I see Hartwig. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I have more than 1,000 rhododendrons in my garden.
Wow.
And about 100 different species. I think that's to put it shortly.
Yeah. I see Hartvig has his hand up.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how I can explain to all of you the way how we work in Germany. Maybe this might be an example how you can work globally. About 9 years ago, we were approached from a federal agency, and they were asking us, can we set up a system in Germany of combining private and public collections to get an idea how many different species of hybrids of rhododendrons we are cultivating in German collections. And the special term was used was agro-biodiversity. So besides the regular biodiversity, the politicians and the federal agencies were looking for agricultural biodiversity. And horticulture is, of course, a part of agriculture, or vice versa. And we were chosen to set up such a system because we are pretty well connected here in Germany within the German Rhododendron Society. So we were asking around. We connected, or we approached several different collections, and after a couple of years of work, we now have a system of 50 members working together in the German gene bank Rhododendron. And we are not collecting genes, we all have living collections. And what we did was putting, first of all the list of rhododendron names, hybrids and species together in a big list. And then we hired 2 people. One was actually visiting these collections. This person was looking at species and trying to identify them, to verify them, which is probably the most important thing of all, is having a clear idea if you have the right hybrid, the correct species in front of you. And the other person was doing the same with hybrids, which is actually much more difficult than the species. And it took us several years. And after 7 years, we now have a network of collections and long lists of species connected with different collections. And this is all being put into a database. So that's the German Gene Bank Rhododendron database, which you can look at in the internet. It's free for all of them. It's only in German, but it will be in English, hopefully in a couple of months. And that was a big effort to get information and at the same time trying to verify the information. So now we have, we have a couple of collections with intensive numbers of species and hybrids. And whenever one of the verified plants is dying, we asking the members of this network to delete them in the database. That's, of course, is a big piece of work. And the Bremen collections I'm responsible for is the biggest one in this database. And I'm probably one of 5 people who are working regularly in this database, deleting plants which have been dying and adding other plants which have been propagated from verified material. So that's a lot of work. That was done in 7 years just in Germany. If you want to extend it into a global scale, it's possible, but it's a lot of work. But it's worth to do this because verified material is the only way to actually discuss on a global basis. Otherwise, that's why I was asking about the Chinese Liwenzi. Is it really Liwenzi? Has anyone looked at the DNA or not? So if you ask around private people, what kind of rhododendrons do you grow in your garden? I would assume that at least 25% will name wrong names just because labels were mixed up, or a friend has said that's Mrs. G. Wee Leek, but it's not Mrs. G. Wee Leek, the hybrid, it's something else. So you have to be careful and you need people who are able to verify this stuff.
Thank you. That was very good. Thank you, Hartvig. because I know from my personal experience that when I have grown seed, wild seed, collected seed, it's very often that you don't get that species that you think you should get. Many are can be hybrids from the nature.
Yeah, definitely, sure.
That's very common.
Yeah, verification is an issue even in garden collections. At Holden Arboretum, I mean, you receive a plant, but you don't know if someone vetted it before it gets a name, and so I think that's a problem across the board.
But in a way, we have this network of experts in the ARS that are some of the probably the premier verifiers that we could find. So,
Oh,
Michael?
Yeah, can I bring up a couple of related challenges that immediately come to mind with this kind of issue, particularly with private collections and collections that are outside of the Botanic Garden network or institutional network. The first being permanence, and that people who hold big and complex and valuable collections tend to be older, and there may or may not be a plan for what happens after them. And I've seen this also with the Heather Society, which is basically dying out. Their collections will simply disappear. The second is compliance. And this is a painful thing if you come from the Botanic Garden research type circles, where we've been very aware for a good number of years of all of the hurdles that we have to step through, and which we have means to get through, as from the academic side, to get our Convention of Biological Diversity and later then Nagoya Protocol documentation accounted for. And it's a challenge, and for private collectors it's simply not available, and it's not been part of the culture. So these are the two challenges I'd like to put out there and see if people have got. I mean, I've discussed this briefly with Alan before, and we just kind of but can I put this out there and see what people can contribute to that?
I know Connor's thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky issue because in the United States, we haven't signed or ratified either of those issues. So there's plenty of collections in the United States where people are just going abroad, collecting what they want and bringing it back, and they're not worried about it. And so I don't know how that fits into the conservation picture, because some people say that those are barriers, because I mean, really, a lot of people just want to conserve these plants, and so they think the best way to do that is to just go and take, whereas a lot other people think it's you're taking, and so you need to give something back, and finding that balance is important. And so like at Holden, we try to honor the spirit of it, but we're not bound to it.
And as a researcher, I have terrible access to plants. I can't get the plants I want to study. If I need, if I wanted, a suite of 10 species from documented origin, that's almost impossible. I have scrabbled and scraped to try to find places to get verified. And so it's a broader, that question of how you deal with these protocols is a broader question. It's the gardeners, it's the researchers. I think this is a barrier for a lot of things, but it's needed, right? They're important. The rules are important. They're there because of abuses. So just like when you look at research protocols for researching humans, they're a pain in the butt, but gee, I don't want to be researched on by somebody who's not following those rules. So yeah, I think it's a serious issue. I saw Yapsa unmuted herself at one point, so I want to give her a chance to chime in.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, what it comes from Alan's talk. What excited me in that was something where you had that rhododendron dissected, and you had biological photographs. So I think people very painstakingly are sort of making databases for genetic information, but not I mean, it's been done before, meticulous morphological, anatomical data, but we don't have databases to microstructures of flowers, dissected images of flowers as you had. Sorry, my internet is sort of giving me trouble. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we've heard almost all of what you said. There were a couple of blips.
Okay, yeah, so I think I got excited because I saw that dissected rhododendron images, and I'm not sure, was it that for a specific purpose, or was it something to deal with the biology of the flower, like the symmetry of the flower, the complex ways in which, was it something for that?
So the project was born out of a book that will be published in China of I think more than 50% of all Chinese rhododendrons will have these images, and it was several Chinese botanic gardens wanted to produce something for the plant world that would elevate plants in terms of conservation to the meteoric rise of the panda. So they had decided, because rhododendrons are so Chinese, that would be a good genus to try and do that. So that's where this project was born from. And the book that's been published in Edinburgh is just a subset of all those Chinese rhododendrons. And just what you were saying about linking, so all those images, we know exactly which accession those images came from. So they're then all backed up with the collection data. So that's all available and linked. And that can be accessed through our living collection database at Edinburgh. So I mean, it's just, yeah, it's a case of linkage. So if people are doing the same thing with their own collections, they just need to explicitly say that this rhododendron image came from this accession, and this accession has these data associated with it. It's not just enough to say this is rhododendron species X.
Yeah.
So we are starting to run out of time. So I know it's been a long Zoom, so we want to give everybody a chance. If anybody's got a burning question that they have not yet had a chance to ask, now's the time.
Is anybody besides me super jazzed about the idea of a working group? Because I am very enthusiastic about the idea of a working group. And I know Juliana have tossed around the idea before of some kind of collaborative working group. I know we have like 4 minutes left, but I am excited about that idea. And I feel like the expertise is here. I feel like there is an opportunity there to tap into some of these existing collections and gardens and either make them more permanent or database some of the data that's in them in a way that would make them more accessible. I could imagine answering really interesting scientific questions with some of that existing work. So I feel really enthusiastic about that. And if other people do as well, maybe we need a longer or just like another dedicated time where our brains are fresh and we can just brainstorm a little bit. Would anybody be up for that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Wow. Good. That's a great question, Jean, because I think I have been so energized. Yesterday and today has been great. I finally got to meet people I've been talking to for like years. Although I have to remind myself this isn't real life. This is actually just, we're still on the video. So someday. But I think that's a good way to bring up, so two things that are going on. One is everything that we have talked about, we are writing down, and I am basically leading a collaborative grant proposal that we will submit later this year, probably at the end of 2021. So I think in terms of everyone coming together, this collaborative proposal would really be for us to work together, for us to do a project, to get to meet, to get to actually do some work together. So if you have thoughts or ideas, please feel free to contact me anytime. We're going to write down everything we said. And then we also have additional meetings coming up in August. So the August meeting is really supposed to be focused around this idea of actually developing a plan to work together. So I think over the next couple of months, perhaps what we need to do is start reaching out to each other and just getting those nuggets of ideas. And then when we get together in August, if we're really prepared to start sort of hashing out I think the tough details are the hard ones, like what Michael brought up. Those are the tough details to work out. So the more we can sort of get our great ideas on paper and then spend time working out those tough details when we get together, I think that's going to be really productive. Yeah, Hartwig.
Jana, I didn't get all the questions Michael was actually producing. So if you could put that into some sort of protocol, would be nice as well. I have a special opinion about private collections being put into a larger system. And I would be happy to at least write a few sentences about that before we meet again in August.
That sounds fabulous. I think what we're going to do is transcribe this meeting, the commentary anyway. So we'll go through and get everybody's questions together. And then why don't we make a plan to share that document with everybody that has attended? And then that'll give us that ability to interact. Does that sound good? Yeah. And I think Christian's got his hand up too.
Yes, yes. I'm making quite much private research, especially on ledum, and I don't publish anything except on my website or write articles to a Journal of American Rhododendron Society or some other magazines, but not any scientific papers. One example is that I have now spent some days now to looking at the herbarium samples of Russian this Moscow herbarium, Moscow University, and I have noticed that there are two species now, ledums, Tolmatsovi and Diversipilosum. And to me, it seems that they are the same species. They only grow, one species grows in Japan and another grows on the other side, on the Russian side. But I don't see any difference in those species when I look at the herbarium samples. And also the identifications written for those two species, they are almost identical. But how can I express this kind of findings through this network?
Well, one thing, Christian, is that we put your website on our resources list. So that was, as soon as I saw your website, I thought this is great. But in terms of, that's a good question. Maybe Bob is a better person to answer how we can share these items. Is the discussion group, or Valerie, maybe? Do you have
I
thoughts?
guess, is there Rhododendrons International? Is that that's an effort by the RRN, right? And I think in that publication that could, I mean, I think we typically highlight researchers at universities or institutions, but that could be some place where we also welcome articles from community scientists that are doing research.
Yeah, great point. And actually the first edition of that journal that we put out that had a lot of scientists from this network in it, it has gotten 1,000 reads on my ResearchGate. It's very popular with researchers. So I think that's a great idea. Glenn has invited us. He would love us to do another special issue on research. So Christian, that seems like might be a really neat venue for you to be able to publish with a bunch of other scientists in that journal. And then that would basically be shared out to the community.
Yeah, and it's an online journal. And and it's publicized by all the rhododendron societies in the world via their website. So it has really good readership. Yes.
It's my most popular item on ResearchGate by far and away. All right, it's 1 o'clock my time, whatever time it is in your corner of the world. And so, what's that?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. So it's your Friday, time to
yeah.
knock off. Yeah. I just want to thank everybody. What a wonderful group. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Valerie. Let's all keep in touch. Don't be a stranger. Get on that chat group, send us an email. So
yeah, and
thank you,
please do
everybody.
sign up to use the chat group. Most of you are not yet signed up, so we'd like to have you do so.
And if you want to download the chat, if there's any links in there from today, you can do that if you go to the chat window. And if you click on the little 3 dots, there's a menu that pops up to save the chat. So if you want to save any of those links from today, you can do that way as well.
Also, thank you, Juliana, for organizing us and getting this meeting together. It's been really fun to see people from all over the world who also love rhododendrons. It's really fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming. It wouldn't have been anything.
Can I say one quick, I'm going to say one quick thing. If you're in the US and you're sitting on verified collections, we have 3 flow cytometers that would love something to do. So if you're sitting on something and you think you know what it is, I think less than 1/3 of rhododendron species have published genome size. And we have a lot of, that's one major thing we like to train our students on. So if you're
Irene,
you know what it is.
Wait for my upcoming paper, and then you will have a lot of new genome paper. It's submitted in review in American Journal of Botany.
Oh, well, then we don't, well, still, if we'll wait till after. No, there are many, many things that need sized, but
yeah,
that's exciting. That's very exciting.
You know, thinking about the idea of verifying collections, maybe an initiative as part of our grant to get ARIS members to, document their collections through flow cytometry, through verification, through genetics. I could see organizing our American ARIS members. I think they would actually be excited about that. So great opportunity.
There is a bioarchive version of our manuscript on genome size evolution in rhododendron. It's an earlier version, but still.
Have you left anything left to do, Dirk? Or
there is a bit left to do.
Sounds like the machines will have something then.
But yeah, if there is anything that needs to be measured in Europe, then send it over to us.
Awesome. Oh, and a little baby has made an appearance right on cue.
Yeah, that's my signal to log off, I'm afraid.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
thank you so
Ellen.
much for
Thank
coming.
you, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.